It is lovely to have you here, Dr. Burns. You have done incredible work with endometriosis research, and you have your own personal ties to the disease that really initiated your passion for this work. Can you tell us a bit about yourself as a researcher?
Absolutely. And thank you very much. And thank you for having me here. I appreciate all of the support that I get from EndoFound as well. So thank you. Who I am as a researcher is I am an associate professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. And my lab focuses on really trying to understand the initiation of endometriosis. So what we do is we focus on using a mouse model of disease. And from that aspect, we look at the early initiation and what happens very early in potential lesion formation. And so trying to understand what happens early in disease is really quite critical, because a lot of what people have studied and where we're trying to put in our own niche in endometriosis research is to study earlier in disease instead of later in disease. So some of my research as a postdoctoral fellow, I focused on work with estrogen receptors, so ER alpha and ER beta. And what we found is that estrogen has really an important role in the later phase of disease, whereas the immune system really seems to have a role in the early part of disease. So from that aspect, to take things forward, we've moved into really studying the immunology of some of these pieces and parts of what's going on early in disease development. From that, and a lot of my training, so my PhD was in molecular toxicology, and then I completely switched and started over as a reproductive biologist, molecular biologist in trying to understand the uterus, trying to understand endometriosis. So from that background and having that kind of a unique experience with toxicology and understanding what happens in the environment, I'm really quite interested and passionate about what we're exposed to and how that may have an effect. And many years ago, people found that some environmental toxicants have an effect on disease. Now we're being exposed to different sets of environmental toxicants than we were years ago. So we're exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals. So some of our work looked at BPA, which is bisphenol A. And we actually then looked at one of the regrettable substitutions for bisphenol A. They say that your water bottle, your plastic water bottle is BPA free. Well, it's BPA free, but that doesn't mean that it's bisphenol something else free. So they change a subgroup or a side group on these molecules. They change the chemical, but they don't change some of the properties. And sometimes they actually make them worse. So those are regrettable substitutions. And what we found a few years ago was that one of the regrettable substitutions for bisphenol A, which is BPAF, or the fluorinated version, actually makes disease growth worse in the animal model. So with that said, now we're really focusing on trying to understand how immunotoxicants and some of the toxicants that are out in our environment may have an effect on our immune system. And so truly trying to understand that early phase of disease and seeing how they affect what happens early instead of how they affect late. Because there's, I think, from my understanding and research, there's two phases of endometriosis, and we want to see how we can prevent endometriosis. And that's really a big part of our focus.
Following up on the research aspect, and forgive me if this is a simple question or not well stated. There has been a lot of theories that endometriosis is tied to genetics. However, now there's this environmental component. Could it be that disease is purely caused by the environmental components and there is no genetic link?
I don't think so. So one of the things that I think, and that actually, Diana, is a really good question, because that's one of the things that I often think about, and I'm thinking about for an application that's coming up for grant application. But the idea of a lot of with cancer models or even with autoimmune diseases and models, there's called a two-hit hypothesis. So the idea is that you have to have some sort of an assault, or you have some kind of a genetic predisposition plus an environmental assault or some kind of stressor or something that could potentially then lead to the development of a disease. And so that's actually, we got an incredibly good score. I don't know if it'll be funded on the grant that we just heard back from, but that's one of the things that we have proposed to look at, is to look at different strains of animals with diverse genetic backgrounds and their exposure to some of these chemicals to see how they respond versus the traditional mouse model where they're all inbred animals. So the idea would be that in your family or in my family, we may be predisposed or not predisposed to endometriosis. So if your family is not predisposed, you could be exposed to potentially a whole lot of chemicals, whereas my family could be predisposed and we're exposed to a lesser amount of chemicals. We may actually develop that disease sooner or actually develop it, whereas your family may not. And so I think there's multifactorial pieces and parts to this, and then where it gets so much more complicated and where finally environmental and toxicology research is really going is to look at mixtures, because we're never exposed to one thing. We're exposed to all kinds of mixtures coming from everywhere. And one of the jokes that I make is I only put up on makeup to give a talk or to give an interview, because we don't know what's really in makeup. There's a lot of things that are not regulated, and they can just put words on there that say fragrance or dyes, and it doesn't have to be specifically regulated. So in that sense, I try to avoid a lot of perfumes, a lot of things that have smells in them, because a lot of those may have some of these chemicals that could be acting as immunotoxicants or endocrine disrupting chemicals.
Even including, let's say, like household candles
Yes,
that can be scented.
yes,
Oh no.
yes, yes,
There goes a lot of my joy.
yes,
But no, very, very important to hit on all of these things. But for you, this is not just your work. This is your life's work, because this hit home for you because and you've been open about this, so I'm not, you know,
no, you're not uncovering anything that we don't already know.
right. Or crossing boundaries that I shouldn't. I always want to be sensitive to someone's journey with endometriosis. So for you, when you finally got your diagnosis after years of not knowing what was going on with your body, and did you think, wow, I'm never going to let this happen again? What was your knee-jerk reaction as somebody who was always so interested in biology? I mean, you talk about when you were 8 years old in one of your past interviews that you were going to use microscopes and you were going to work at the NIH. So this was like born with you.
Yes, it's very interesting. And my sister says to me, you ask more questions in 1 minute than I think of in the whole day. And she says to me, you knew from the very beginning what you wanted to do. And while some of that's true, it's not completely true. I actually spent many, many years trying to figure out what was wrong with me and why I had so much pain. And it took really roommates in college that said to me, this is not normal. What you've been told, this is not normal. You need to go to the doctor. It's okay to go see somebody. It's okay to get help. And I was telling somebody the other day that the first gynecologist I saw said to me, well, maybe you have a tampon that's stuck, and that's what's causing all this pain, and that's what's the problem is. And my response was dumbfoundedness, number one. And number two is, don't you think if I put a tampon in, I would know that I took it out? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But that was really my first experience. And then I actually went first to a general surgeon, and they found a mass of endometriosis that was actually outside my peritoneal cavity. Then I became all of these surgeries to really understand endometriosis. So at that point, as a biology major, I wanted to study cancer, and I wanted to understand what was going on and how things were happening in our bodies and around us, and really interested in that environmental factor. And I looked online, and this was 1998, 99, 2000, probably when I had my first surgeries. And there was almost nothing that I could find on endometriosis. Literally, I read every paper that was published, which was very, very minimal on endometriosis. There was almost nothing known. And it took until I was most of the way through graduate school when there was actually a paper, I think it was either out of Harvard or MIT, which was on a mutation of PTEN. And it was such an inspiring to see that somebody was actually working on this and trying to understand it, that it could be studied from a laboratory perspective, that really inspired me. And what also truly, truly changed the whole trajectory of my life is that I was a patient in a clinical trial at NIH with Dr. Pam Stratton. As the patient, she took my lesions out. They studied me. They studied my blood, my urine, my whatever they could take, they have and have studied. And I saw there that clinical translational aspect of disease, and putting that together with other people starting to study this disease. I literally went and emailed everybody that had a grant on anything that was uterus related, or very few that were endometriosis related in the, it was about 2006, 2007 at that point. And to find somebody that would write back to me, find somebody that would show interest, was unreal how difficult it was. And I actually had one person say to me, you know nothing about a uterus, you know nothing about anything that's related to endometriosis. This would take X number of years to retrain you, to get you acquainted with anything endometriosis or a uterus. People don't have money, people don't have time, and it's not going to happen. And I was like, I'm not going to let that happen. This is what I really want to do, because I really think that I have been given some ability in some way to be able to study this. And so that's really how I pushed through this. And to some degree, the kind of unwritten role communication with my postdoctoral mentor is I was really good at site-directed mutagenesis. And he needed somebody to do this type of a project, and that's what he wanted. And I wanted to do endometriosis and to develop endometriosis experiments and models. And he said, if you do this on the side, I'll let you do this. And so that's how I developed my program then on endometriosis. Did it take me a lot longer than some people? Absolutely. But exactly what you said, it is my life's journey. It's part of who I am. It's part of what my makeup is to try to understand this. So I was given a gift of being able to think in some way and to think deeply about certain things and to question. And that's where I feel that I'm supposed to be using that.
I love that you did not take all of that negative feedback and instead you used it to propel yourself forward and say, nope, I know I have the be and I will figure out the exact know-how along the way.
Okay, so many years later, that's may be how it seems. But to completely be honest, it really was quite difficult. It was very hard, and my confidence is, I'm not a very confident person. So I had to work with my confidence, and I still have to work with my confidence. And to work with that and to see therapists and to work with being rejected, being told no, having a chronic disease, all of these pieces and parts add to depression, anxiety, and questioning. And so the journey is not easy, but the journey, I feel, has a purpose. And as I've mentioned before to other people, is if I weren't passionate about my research, because the research and getting grants and funding and keeping your lab going is so incredibly difficult, that I would have quit years ago. But trying to understand this is why I keep going and keep trying.
Well, thank you for also sharing that, because I think someone looks at you, they think you're very accomplished, you're very confident. Well, you are. And I don't think you should take that away. But I think so many of us don't talk about just the human aspect of dealing with a chronic disease, or just, for goodness sake, being a human being, which is really
Right.
hard in a very harsh world.
Right.
And
And
everyone has something to deal with.
exactly. And to add to that, so my first surgery was on St. Patrick's Day. which was a Wednesday of spring break. I went back to school that Monday and trying to keep going and trying to understand. My second surgery was a week and a half before I started my senior year or junior year, I can't remember, of college. And that's where they did then even more removal of endometriosis and trying to understand different things. So trying to do well in school, trying to keep your head above water while you're healing and while you're dealing with all of these things can be quite difficult. And from that aspect, I would really just encourage young people to really keep trying and keep pushing if this is really something that you want to do and you have a passion for, because it does take an incredible amount of persistence. And I have on my wall over here is persistence prevails when all else fails. And I truly believe that, because persistence is what's allowed me to get to where I am. And I say to people with my having a PhD, I don't think I'm any smarter than anybody else. And you said accomplished, whatever, but I am no smarter than anybody else. I call it pure human determination, the PhD in it. And that's what a big part of, I think, having a degree like this means. And you have to have some level of determination to get through it.
Excellent advice. To just go back to the research component of things, how is it applicable, your findings into, let's say, everyday life? You did mention about the water bottles. I brought up the scented candles, which again is very disappointing. But how, we could figure out maybe what to omit from our lives, right? That could cause the disease to progress.
Yes. And so that's some of what I've done with myself and to try to understand things is I make sure that my pots and pans that I cook out of are stainless steel, don't have any of the nonstick lining. So avoid the nonstick lining. I got new carpet multiple years ago and they said, do you want the stain repellent, whatever, whatever? No, that chemical is an immunotoxicant and I don't want that in my house. Do you want your couch sprayed with stain resistant, blah, blah, blah? No, I don't want my couch sprayed with this stuff. So deodorant, things like that, your stuff that you wash your clothes with. So I make sure I buy free and clear clothes detergent. The deodorant I use is just one of those, it's called a crystal something or other, where it's just basically salt to change, to avoid the bacterial growth, which is what causes you to have body odor in that sense. So I don't use any certain levels of chemicals. Now, do I have scented soaps in my bathroom? Yes, because sometimes you just enjoy those things. So there's a level of picking and choosing your battles. And I think, having your scented candles once a week or something is probably going to be just fine. I wouldn't burn them constantly because we don't necessarily know unless it's a natural fragrance that's in there. But my water bottles are metal, or I use a glass bottle. Just making simple changes like that, I think, can have an effect on the chemical amount that you're getting in your body.
That is such solid, everyday, very useful advice. And to look between those lines, like you said, just don't trust what's on the label, look a little bit deeper. And that's what you've done your whole life, Dr. Burns, is that you've looked deeper into things than most people.
Ask questions, yes.
Yes, look deeper and ask those questions. So thank you for your time today.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And don't forget to subscribe and like our YouTube page.